Oh, okay.
Do you want me to?
No, so long as it's active. Is it working? Should be there.
I just tried to pay. What was the presenters?
Yeah, it's up. We're good. You just put it in presenters mode and you're fine.
Do you know where's presenters?
That's it.
mode?
That one.
This
Yeah,
one?
that's it. There you go.
Okay.
Cool.
So you are student, so requires you to either speak into there or if you want to walk around.
Okay.
Do you have you got a clicker, right? You have one of these? You want to use one of these? I'll use that. You're going to stand here and what? Okay, so use that mic. Okay, just stay on that mic, that's fine. Great. Good afternoon and welcome to this Road Centre talk. It's a real pleasure to welcome Małgorzata Mazurek here, Associate Professor of Polish Studies at Columbia University. She is a PhD from Warsaw University and, as I said, teaches at Columbia in the History Department. I could read the bio, but I'll just give a better, more sort of personal story. This is Tony's fault. Right? So basically, Tony sent this email out and sent a chapter of her book and said, dude, you got to read this. It's totally amazing. And I've always had a soft spot for the Polish economist Michał Kalecki. And anything with Kalecki in it, I'm kind of like, ooh, this is interesting. And I read this chapter, and I don't want to steal anything from the talk, but it was amazing because even the sort of the relevance for it today, you will see in terms of sort of, you can have an incredible diagnosis of what's actually wrong in the world. You can be right about that diagnosis, and the powers that be can go, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do something insane instead, right? And that is sort of what I took away from it. I was deeply impressed by the paper and then immediately hunted her down, found out where she was and said, please come and give us a talk. So this is the forthcoming book that she will talk about, and it's really great to have you here. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark, for this very generous introduction, and I'm very, very glad to be here. I stayed the semester in London, and a friend of mine asked me, "You are now in Providence? What about climate change?" You know, so it is really important for me to be here, and I made this transatlantic trip to be with you, and I would like to particularly welcome three people: Professor Ethan Pollock, Professor Holly Case, and Professor Michael Kennedy, whom I know and who have seen this project in its early stages. And also there is a personal story tied to my connection to Mark Blyth, which is I was working on an epilogue, and I, as many historians do, try to tie the past to the present. And your book on austerity, which is historically minded, and that is historically minded, and also Angrynomics was very important for me when I was trying to understand so what now. And I think there's this very very nice convergence, and I appreciate that we can have a dialogue between political economists and historians. So this book is a social history of ideas, placing a lot of emphasis not just on ideas, but also on their context. And the context are new states of East Central Europe that came about before and after World War I, but they were created on the rubbles of the German, Russian, Habsburg, and Ottoman land empires. And without having here a map, you just need to imagine the stretch of Eastern Europe from roughly Baltic Sea to Mediterranean that was characterized historically by multi-ethnicity, but also by history of mass migration. And this book traces the history of developmental thinking that imagined those countries that historically were known for, since the 19th century, for their mass migration as places to live, not places to live. And then now my Polish accent absolutely obliterates this you know, poetic distinction. But I hope you get an idea. So there is this very interesting moment of development that I think we just underestimate the assumption behind it, which is that development is thinks about nation state as a unit, and it's a stationary state where population is in place, and the policies designed for the population are policies designed for people who stay put. But I uncovered the context that preceded this banal observation about, the tenets of development, which is the rich and quite torturous history of mass emigration, but also ethnic cleansing and policies of eliminatory nationalism, etc. So I recover here an unknown chapter in the history of political economy in which the local population was imagined as stationary rather than slated for work migration, forced removal, or mobilization for settler colonialism. So this is basically a social history of idea in which I explain why and how a poor nation state became the key unit of developmental thinking in the 20th century. And this still, and the question is how we should think about it today. So I will quickly sum up the idea of the book. The book focuses on interwar Poland, where development gestated as a decidedly local knowledge before it became a set of planning techniques for the global other, right? Development is often imagined as planning for the other. But at its roots, if we think about development from the perspective of Eastern Europe, it was a local knowledge for local people, not for some remote destinations. And I look in this in that story at people who sought to improve living conditions for the entirety of Poland's population, which consisted of a multi-ethnic mass of people. Poles, ethnic Poles, but also Jews, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Germans, and people who in the early 20th century didn't know who they are in terms of their national belonging. And I call the set of theories and policies designed for the multi-ethnic Polish society as full employment developmentalism. And I'm sure that my editor, who has yet to give me their directions, will say no. Full employment developmentalism. It's a terrible jargon that historians don't use. But the point is, but what I mean by it is that there was an idea of full employment that was properly Eastern European, that emerged independently from, say, John Maynard Keynes' idea of full employment and other Western inventions in the realm of economics, that was, in essence, an economic science for a poor nation state, right? So I recover here in this book why and how development was organized around the idea of job creations, full employment, but in the context of multi-ethnicity and what could be called economic underdevelopment, although it's a questionable term. This knowledge had very high stakes because it was an intellectual movement that aimed to replace emigration with jobs creations, and it aimed not just at economic policies, but also it tried to solve problems of ethno-nationalism and ethnic coexistence, and it was basically about the fate of people who lived in interwar Poland, because full employment developmentalism opposed mainstream politics of the time that advocated differentiation, separation, and emigration of ethnic minorities, in particular the Jewish population. I would like now to take you to, I think, my narrative device, which is the history of people. And in this book, I do focus on two Warsaw-based economists, Ludwik Landau and Michał Kalecki, who together promoted industrialization and full employment policies in interwar Poland. Landau and Kalecki were assimilated Jews, and this status equipped them with a unique vision for integrating nationalities, or thinking in terms of coexistence, integration, or uniting different peoples, and against the politics of differentiation, or thinking about Polish economy as divided between, I don't know, for example, Jewish economy and ethnic Polish economy. So these two figures were also Marxists. This was interwar period was really the era of radical ideologies, and they definitely subscribed to them. But their Marxism was skeptical towards Soviet communism and very vigilant vis-a-vis fascism, that was the dominant, basically, ideology in Europe in the 1930s. So these people were economists, but they were also political activists, and they are behind this long concept which I called full employment developmentalism, as they advocated for industrialization, mass investments, full employment in an era that basically promoted fiscal conservatism or austerity and immigration policies. Here, this is basically the heart of the book, because the two of them worked at the Institute of Business Cycles and Prices, and I would like to stress here that while the book is very much makes a local argument about something that became an international policy or politics, this knowledge was very much embedded in the European economic science of the time, by which I mean US-style business cycle research, market research, thinking in terms of depression and upswing and sort of cyclical nature of capitalism. This was a very important branch of economic science after World War I, as it seems like it was, as many economists believed it is possible to harness capitalism by somehow anticipating or forecasting how market would fluctuate. At the same time, both Landau and Kalecki were following developments in economic science in Germany. That was still a sort of a model for human and social sciences in East Central Europe, where economy was increasingly imagined as a circuit, as a circular arrangement in which production impacts consumption, consumption impacts production. It's basically a circular mechanism where payments, where money, goods and people form a whole. And there are these two different ideas in economic science, which is supply-demand equilibrium and then a circular economy. So without going into mechanics of this interwar knowledge, I just want to mark that these were templates to think about economic life in the interwar era, and that Poland was very much tied to a broader ecosystem of or circuit of ideas. what I think the book is really trying to make very, very clear by using rare sources that I have unearthed since 2014 at least, is that behind this work behind scholarly work, there was also a lot of political activism that was usually done underground or in semi-legal spaces. And so, unlike many books on economic ideas that follow people attending conferences or debates taking place in scholarly journals or intertextual analysis, here I uncover places where economists published under pseudonyms, where the names and sort of debates with fellow scholars were absolutely obscured or even disrupted by the nature of sort of clandestine knowledge production, and the book explains why it was impossible to think about full employment or prosperity for multi-ethnic society in the interwar period without without going underground. The arc of the book is chronological. It's not a big... here there is no big surprise. I cover here the lifespan of a critical intellectual generation tied to Landau and Kalecki, beginning with the legacy of positivism in Warsaw and ending in 1968, when the Polish Communist Party basically purged Kalecki and his students from the Polish Academy due to an anti-Semitic campaign that unleashed in 1968 in Poland. So the arc of the book really spans several decades, from late 19th century to late 1960s. However, at the heart of the narrative is the interwar period. So here so basically the first chapters introduce cultural background of Landau and Kalecki. I will say a few words about it in a second. The next chapter discusses how Polish economists became part of this market research ecosystem that also aimed, in the Polish case, create a national economy tied to a world capitalist economy. Another chapter puts stress on national income research, that in Poland was called social income. Then I also dive even deeper into interwar period, where I look at the outside political context in which these ideas were created, which was Poland's adjacent status between Poland's status as a buffer zone between, or a buffer state between, Soviet Union and the rest of Europe, and then increasingly between Soviet Union and Germany, that became subjected to Nazi policies and Nazi politics also, and became a war economy of a new kind. Then I move towards how these economists try to reply to these developments by forming political alliances with political parties and sell their ideas on the market, on the... I'm sorry, I don't know what to do. And then the book goes even deeper into this vortex of political and physical violence when I discuss the outbreak of the World War II and its impact on the ideas developed during interwar period, and then the post-World War II period is basically an afterthought. So what I imagined to be the heart of the project 10 years ago, which is Cold War era international development and how it spread from the Soviet bloc to other parts of the world, became really a project about interwar Poland and its and the attempts to create viable national states in region where ethnic antagonism was ripe. Now, after walking you through the arc of the book, I would like to quickly jump into the basic, tell you a few words about the historical context that I'm here focusing, because again, my editor said full employment developmentalism. No. Kingdom of Poland, you need to explain what it is. So because I'm just freshly after talking to my editor, I decided to provide a few facts. If they are too basic, my apologies. But what is important is that the background of ideas created in interwar Poland has its roots historically in the Congress Poland or Kingdom of Poland, or even called sometimes Russian Poland, which was the most industrialized part of the Russian Empire in its western borderland. So here you have the map of Europe with Kingdom of Poland being a part of this vast landmass of the Russian Empire. Kingdom of Poland was a multi-ethnic region inhabited by Poles, Jews, Germans, Russians, and other groups, that lived from or built its capital in the era of industrial revolution in the late 19th century from on export of textiles, and this was it was basically the engine of industrial revolution taking place in the late 19th century in that part of the Russian Empire. And the fact these facts will, as I'm going to tell you later, will have some significance. Because, for example, Michał Kalecki was basically a child of industrialists exporting textiles to the heartland of to Eurasia. Here you have a textile factory of Michał Kalecki's father, located in the city of Łódź, that, as you may know, has been named Polish Manchester in the 19th century. It was a boom town that transformed into a big city in the course of the 19th century, and families like Michał Kalecki's family, Polonized Jews who had collected some capital, were at the forefront of this industrial revolution. The same applies to Ludwig Landau, whose grandfather had built this vast residence in the city of Tomaszów, also in the Kingdom of Poland, near Łódź, and it was also a textile industry town. Another economist who comes from Tomaszów is Oskar Lange, and some of you may know him. So I'm talking about people for whom industrialization, capitalist industrialization, was bread and butter. They grew up in those red brick cities, and while development has many meanings, it can mean small community building. In this part of Europe, definitely industrialization was imagined as a sort of way of creating a sort of like a modern economy. For generation preceding, for people who were at the forefront of industrialization of Kingdom of Poland, the outbreak of the World War I was a huge rupture. And I think this is a really under-researched thing, because during the German occupation of the Kingdom of Poland, right, which had been a Russian territory, most factories were either evacuated, and if they were not evacuated to the interior of Russia, they were simply plundered and dismantled. So the industrialization of this economic region was a huge event that also affected families of Michał Kalecki. Here I show a piece of paper with a handwritten note by Michał Kalecki's uncle, who tried to get some money back after World War I from Germany, and he estimated figures. He estimated how much money Germany owed him after World War I. Moving forward, another big development is the creation of interwar Poland. That was created not just on the, in the place in the country devastated by the war, and with this disjointed economic structure, but also ravaged by the occupation. So independent Poland from the beginning had huge economic problems, and it was basically created not just on the rubbles of three empires, Russian, German, and Habsburg, but it also very few people believe that it's a viable economic unit that had to be yet had to be created. And I think one of the last things that I would like to mention here as a way of introducing the historical context is the problem of multi-ethnicity in the Polish nation state. So I just here the pink color are ethnic Poles, who constituted roughly almost 70% of the population, but the rest were so-called ethnic minorities or minority nationalities, with a large proportion of Ukrainians, Jews, Belarusians, and other nationalities. And I'm mentioning it because in economic writings left by Polish economists, you will never ever see any mention of nationality. So the actors in economic theories are maybe workers, maybe producers or consumers, but they are never categorized ethnically. And yet, I'm really trying hard to prove in this book that the context of multi-ethnicity was extremely important for understanding why idea of full employment economy and this kind of self-expanding economy came into being in this part of Europe. So this is basically a sort of a background layer that I uncover in this book as a necessary context to understand economics that was otherwise class obsessed, right? That class is, in Marxism is everything. But here it has to be understood in the different context. I also think about it, why it matters. For example, because class and occupation typically overlapped with nationality and religion. So, for example, here you have a Polish small town marketplace where you have Christian peasants delivering their goods to the market, and they were Polish, Orthodox. If they were Orthodox, that meant maybe they were Ukrainian or Belarusian, and those with whom they interacted in the marketplace were often sellers, shopkeepers, etc., and those actors were very often Jewish, right? So it's basically this kind of a shtetl economy or small town economy where market economy met with household economy, and here the class very much overlapped with nationality and religion, even well into the interwar period. Finally, what was Poland in the international world order? It was a frontier state of world capitalism, protecting Europe from the emergent Bolshevik state, and Polish political elites, irrespective of political color, supported that stance, wanted Poland to be integrated in a world capitalist economy, and so Poland was very much part of this gold standard system, where, right, in order to get a loan, right, you had to meet certain requirements and, keep your national budget very tight, and basically that blocked a lot of ideas of development or more active policies of investment that were circulating in Poland, but they were almost always curtailed by this paradigm of stabilization that was dominant. It was very powerful. So even though Poland, for example, had the very, quite incredible legal measures that labor protection, for example, was a legislation that was very developed in Poland. It was never really implemented because there was no money to implement this otherwise very progressive legislation. What this allegiance to gold standard meant was that if there was any policy, public policy, in post-World War I independent Poland, it was a paradigm of Poland being an emigrant state. And I'm literally citing, taking emigrant state from documents of the League of Nations, in which Polish authorities position Poland as an emigrant state because of, right, that if you, in which labor migration was seen as a solution to problem of poverty, or as a welcomed international mechanism to manage local population. And I think this is very important because even though in the interwar period, countries like United States and Latin America were closing its borders to Eastern Europeans, and then during the Great Depression, emigration became even less a viable offer, less viable policy. Poland and its authorities did not have any other public policy in store. It was basically the only paradigm that existed. And it's very, I think, important to understand that if there was such a thing as deglobalization in interwar period, it doesn't mean that automatically policies adjusted in real time to those external circumstances. To the contrary, Poland became even more insistent to push for emigration of Polish citizens from Poland in the 1930s, when real chances to get out were even were less and less realistic. So back to our actors. I will speed up because I'm already speaking for 30 minutes. But what I want to show you are a few things about Ludwik Landau and Kalecki that help us understand how, the sort of the elements and pieces that eventually shaped the idea of full employment. So one of those pieces were studies on Poland's uneven development and the structure of its domestic market. Poland, after World War I, was a new state, and it was an enigma. It had to be made legible, it had to be measured. National statistics was just developing, right, in the 1920s. And Ludwik Landau was basically became the key economic statistician of interwar Poland, and I'm not really overblowing his relevance. He was the economic statistician in the interwar period, and he happened to be the closest collaborator of Michał Kalecki, who is much better known for theorizing things. So what Ludwig Landau discovered as a sort of a city boy, right, from big industrial city, is that in the Polish countryside, statistics of fireproof buildings, something that sounds very irrelevant, showed that the degree of material development of the Polish countryside, right? The fireproof buildings usually meant buildings made of brick, and buildings that were not fireproof were those houses with thatched roofs and wooden structures. And so his statistics of fireproof buildings showed for the first time, and at a glance, those huge structural problems that Poland had, which is development in the West and what he called underdevelopment in the East. And why it mattered, because it also was one of the first steps to understand what was the capacity of national economy, how much money people had, how much money they could spend, and it basically was an information about, not just about, how many houses are made of brick or wood, but also it was also an introduction to understanding living standard, right, in interwar Poland. So the book really traces those the nitty-gritty of statistical research in interwar Poland to show how empirical reality informed economic ideas that were not just created out of, deductively, but rather were based on very meticulous empirical research in the realm of social economics, labor statistics, etc., etc. And the next, another step was measuring and studying the capacity of the domestic market economy, which was basically a statement about its rather dire state. And here I go to places such as Gęsia Street in Warsaw, where it was basically a street where Jewish wholesalers traded textiles and shipped them dispatched them to to smaller towns and even villages. And Landau and Kalecki did surveys in the street in this Jewish street of Warsaw to understand what wholesale trade can tell about the state of trade in general in Poland, and what does it say about the intersection of production of stuff, distribution, and also consumption, right? So by tracing in really great detail those actual spaces, I'm showing how national economy was constructed as a statistical knowledge. What is fascinating for me, and I have at least one chapter dedicated only to it, is how interwar economic research completely reconfigured understanding of local population. Here you have a way to you see an illustration showing how peasants were represented or portrayed by Polish intelligentsia. They were often portrayed as ethnic types, right? Just like you would, bring some colonial peoples to an, metropolitan exhibition. And this kind of ethnographic research, or like ethnographic understanding of peasantry, was rejected by this, left-leaning economic science. By that I mean the fact that in economic research, peasants were for the first time counted and represented as potential, not just as ethnic types that work in their self-sufficient, plot of land, but also as workers, as people who make part of the labor market, right? Very modern categories were applied to peasants, and this is how Landau and Kalecki measured unemployment, by including not just people who had job contracts and were counted in labor statistics, but also this vast world of people who were not captured by statistics and that was not captured by any kind of legal contract. And in this world in which legal contract was not present was the world of Jewish small towns and also countryside, especially in the east of the country. So if we think about full employment, and now I'm getting at, we'll get to the sort of basically the high point of this presentation. By full employment, Landau and Kalecki meant everyone, literally everyone, also women, right? I mean, this should go even without saying, but it included rural population, female, right, adult women, also young people who were not yet on the job market but were just about to enter the job market. So it was an all-encompassing category. So this research showing poverty in Polish lands became extremely important when the Great Depression hit the country. And Great Depression manifested as poverty in Poland, mostly because statistics of unemployment was so limited officially. Great Depression manifested in lower living standard, but also in ethnic antagonism, and this was another impulse to, really push for more research on national economy that would. I think it was clear from 1931, would then lead to some kind of a new policy that would replace this paradigm of emigration and austerity. And here I just have two examples from showing prevalence of political discrimination and ethnic antagonism in inter-rural Poland, targeting mostly Jews, but also Ukrainians, who also were actively contesting the Polish state. So it was a complex situation that basically led many people to a conclusion that something has to be done in Poland, because it seemed like there is no place for everyone. And so starting with the early 30s, ideas of eliminatory nationalism, in which idea of forced migration would become something more imaginable, started to develop. And it sort of raised the stakes of full employment, the idea of full employment. So, to sum up, the Polish idea of full employment aimed to create a self-expanding, ethnically inclusive economy under the conditions of forced autarky, right? In the world of closed borders. It aimed to accommodate minority nationalism within the national state. The point was not to abolish Poland as a nation state, because my protagonists were Polish patriots. They were not nostalgic about the imperial time. They wanted to give national state, which was a kind of a new formation in this part of Europe, a positive meaning. And then, in terms of political economy, the gist of the full employment idea was was radical. It was to replace capitalism with socialism. So it was a revolutionary idea, and I try to show in the book how this radicalism manifested and how it differed from radicalism of Nazism, radicalism of communism, and other isms present in the Europe of the 1930s. I show in detail steps leading to full employment developmentalism in terms of theories and ideas, and explain step by step the mechanics of these ideas, something that I think economists would like to hear more about. You know, like, okay, like how do you actually want to create full employment developmentalism in the country without money, you know? And I'm happy to talk about it, but again, today the stress is on context. What is the framework to that wraps that black box of modeling and economic theory? This black box of economic theory is sometimes hard to quickly explain because its author, Michał Kalecki, his theory of business cycles, which is really an incredible achievement, he kept his theory very, I mean, it was not very descriptive, and he was just a very concise writer, and so the whole empirical detail that I have uncovered in the book is basically absent from his writings. Ludwig Landau, his achievement is really to capture global inequalities in statistics. This is basically his major contribution, showing what underdeveloped country like Poland should do to go to a better place. And this the book called World Economy, Production and National Income in Numbers can be easily compared to analog books by Colin Clark, who was John Maynard Keynes' statistician, in its scope and ambition. What I think is now one of my last points is really makes Poland and this knowledge unique in comparison to other places from which ideas of development emerged, is that in Poland problems of development manifested in extreme forms. Of course, there was a forced autarky, I talked about it, but then the local stakes were very high. It was about, in the late 1930s, minority rights were abolished, and ideas of forced migration or forced removal of Jews, but also other ethnic minorities, were formulated as raison d'etat of Poland, but also, as we know, were present in ideology of Nazi Germany, etc. And there was also a rising pressure from Hitler's Germany and Stalin's Russia on Poland to, which was a geopolitical pressure, and we know that the World War II brought the partition of Poland between those two powers. Also, what is very characteristic or unique in Poland is that many of these ideas were developed at risk of persecution, as anything that was Marxist or radical socialist was often deemed subversive, and publications were confiscated, and many people who were radical socialists, communists for sure, were imprisoned or had were losing their jobs, etc., etc. So this context is also present. I'm showing those clandestine publications and explain their context, which is, another big chapter. So to sum up, I would like to make 4 points that I think we should take from my project. First of all, I'm trying to make here an anti-diffusionist argument about interwar knowledge production. What I mean by it, Poland was not just a periphery that emulated Germany or Great Britain in its attempt to create cutting-edge modern public policy. These ideas developed independently, in dialogue, of course, in transnational circulation of ideas, but also independently from what was happening in Cambridge or what was happening in Berlin and other places. So I know that there existed also Hungarian statisticians and economists who had also similar ideas to those that were created in Poland, and of course there is such a rich world of ideas in the Soviet Union, also in East Asia, in Latin America. And I do believe that you cannot just explain this interwar period as the moment of experimentation with economic ideas solely as a sort of transfer of knowledge from one place to another, but rather as a sort of a moment in which many people felt under pressure to really rethink how world economic order or local economic policy, local economic life should work in order to create a better society, or or do something else, which also happened. So anti-diffusionist argument applies both to good guys and also to bad guys, of course. Then criteria of assessing the relevance of knowledge production. I often hear, okay, Małgosia, so nice that you reconstructed the history of these lovely two people who wanted the best, who wanted to improve lives of people, etc. But you talk about what about the implementation of these ideas? And indeed, there is a very cruel irony in the fact that full employment was really implemented in Poland when the country became a monoethnic state as a result of World War II and the Holocaust and ethnic cleansing. And that's then the sort of economy that was based on providing or even forcing everyone to work had more to do with big power politics, and World War II then results of the World War II then with intellectual life of local actors. So there is a very cruel irony about how little control people coming from Eastern Europe had over their own fate, but also over the life of their ideas. And I think this has to be really understood. It's different to be in Harvard, invent, Harvard Barometer, that was the benchmark of market research in the 1920s, and really have all the money of the world to spread it across the world. And it's really very different situation when you create new ideas in war-torn places that have little control over their destiny. And the two last points is the relevance of nation state for public policy making. In the interwar period, nation state was still, still is, as historians we know everything is changing all the time, but national state was really something that could be filled with new content and had And I think that full employment policy was one of the things that really tried to make national state with, combine national state with multi-ethnicity in a way that would be, that would accommodate and bring a better life for multi-ethnic population. So I put stress on this multi-ethnic prosperity. And I do think that even that today national state is also still, people think about public policy within, frame it as a problem of a national state, despite the fact that planetary thinking became so widespread. So I do think that it's still, that nation state, it's still there, and the story may help really think about it. And the final point is about, this juxtaposition of industrial development and emigration, right? Industrial development as something that replaces mass migration. Of course, in real life, you have very often both policies taking place at the same time. People, but today, sort of demographic and also declared desire to change your place of, life and work if your country is in trouble, is huge. This pressure became much bigger, even though still 96% of the world population lives in places where they were born. But of course, this question of whether development is a remedy or for mass migration, I think it's still, of course, with us, and I'm happy to take questions about it. I'm sure I have made some mental some shortcuts and did not explain anything, but I am happy to take any questions right now. Thank you so much.
As we're actually now at 1 o'clock, anyone who needs to leave at 1 should probably leave now, and then we'll begin the questions so it's not disruptive. We'll just hang on a minute.
Thank you so much, Małgosia. This was incredible. I really love this project, and your presentation was outstanding. I have a couple of questions on the 4 points in light of the entirety of the project, because you talked about how...
the last points?
Yeah, the anti-diffusionist argument about interwar knowledge production. And I was wondering how then does one think about causes in terms of especially when various phenomena or various ideas pop up in in different places for different reasons at roughly the same time. Like how then does one think about the sort of the fact of them popping up at the same time in those different places, if the contextual explanation is absolutely, like the sort of narrower contextual explanation is so strong, how do we get to, like the fact that, like the simultaneity of the emergence of the ideas. So, and the other question is about how little control they had over the life of their ideas, which I think is a fantastic insight. And it got me thinking about the history of ideas more generally. Would you say that, let's say, Keynesianism and had, that the people who came up with and promoted it had much more control over the trajectory of their ideas?
Yeah.
Or like how would you make that the comparison between the kinds of control, the kinds of unintended consequences, and where those things, like just as a sort of exercise in thinking about intellectual history and the history of ideas more generally. Thank you.
Do you want to do one at a time, or do you want
Yeah,
to take
I
a
would
couple?
like to maybe take Holly's question because it's
Yeah, sure.
and
then Andrew
you
can
help
comment
me
on
bring some nuance to this presentation. Midway through this project, I had the pleasure to talk to Carol Gluck, who is a historian of Japan, now retired at Columbia University, and she has this conceptual paper in which she says that this whole center-periphery framework doesn't really work when we talk about 20th century, because you can tell the history of modern world in the 20th century, where modernity, or like capitalist economy, for example, reaches pretty much every corner of the world. Even those who are not directly affected by world capitalist economy in the 20th century, or other kind of modern political. I'm just need to pause because I have too many thoughts in my head. Basically, since everyone is affected by civilizational changes such as capitalist development or communist state building, then you can tell the history or narrate the history of the world from any place in the world. And she called it the places that were elsewhere are now everywhere. So it's this distinction of elsewhere, somewhere elsewhere, things happened, and it doesn't mean that they started the sort of a causal chain of events, but you can tell history of, say, international development, I think, from any place in the world. It can be an island in the Pacific, it can be Eastern Europe, it can be Japan, or Manitoba, right? And you will still have to go through. Of course, context would be very different in each place, but basically the sort of the predicament, or a sort of a common shared condition, would be quite similar. And so it's a big claim, but I think it really works for history of social science and for history of economic life in the 20th century. So there is this idea of causal, chains is broken by rejecting the paradigm of center-periphery, right? Because center-periphery really makes this really far-reaching assumption that some places were central and some places were peripheral. And through the 20th century, many Eastern Europeans had narrated their own story as a history of periphery. And I grew up with this approach, and I think the post-colonial theory makes it even stronger. But I do believe that if we do try to make justice to this incredibly rich world of ideas that you can uncover if you want, you will soon end up with this inexplicable simultaneity and richness that cannot be only explained by imposing some kind of hierarchy, be it based on epistemology or geopolitical status or story that those nation states told themselves. So I really basically try to be very chronological in my book, and I look for, by really recovering step by step the process of knowledge production, I have causal chains, but in the locally. But in the broader scheme of things, I believe that I try to understand why Kalecki preceded Keynes, and he came up with very similar explanation. Of course, they were together members of econometric society, which was like a sort of cutting-edge branch of economics in the interwar period. So there are all these networks of, scholarly networks that helps explain that certain language of economic science was accessible to many actors at the very same time. But the sort of history of scholarly networks does not really explain, the story of these inventions, because they were mostly dictated by local pressures, by local context, where stakes were so much bigger than just, academic standing or, and the control over the ideas is it's true. Like John Robinson, who was a collaborator of Keynes, said that Keynesian revolution came too late because policies that mobilized population to work preceded theory, right? Nazi Germany preceded general theory written by Keynes. So yes, in the real world, I think historians of social science overestimate the impact of ideas in intellectual life, and I'm very much aware of it. Even though it's a social history of ideas, not the history of policy making. I think that people who were in Cambridge knew that certain the career of Keynesianism came too late.
Thank you. I enjoyed this enormously to the point where I'm actually now 6 minutes late for a meeting. So if I rush out, I apologize. But I have two related questions, and I think they're also related to the prior question. You tell this endogenous story of intellectuals debating these issues of Reconstruction versus emigration in Poland, but at the same time, and I think you've sort of acknowledged that, there is an exogenous debate going on about the same issues.
Yes.
And you have, Jews in London and New York, the Joint Distribution Committee in particular, who are debating exactly this. So one question is, are they in touch with Landau and Koletsky? Are they operating in two completely different worlds? And then the second question is whether and to what degree you engage Zionism. Because the emigration was largely supposed to go to Palestine. And your opinion of Reconstruction in Poland versus emigration was largely conditioned by your faith or lack of faith in the Zionist project. And there were, in fact, people who visited Poland, lost faith in Reconstruction, and became Zionist afterward. And I'm wondering whether and to what degree you engage those debates and the role of the Zionist project in this whole discussion in and around Poland.
Should I take another question for the sake of time? Or?
I have a similar question on, here you have these two bourgeois assimilated Jews developing as Marxists a theory that has very little to do, at least in its presentation, with class, totally embedded in the nation state. So, how Jewish is it? How Marxist is it? And I guess the tag on is that the homeboy of Landau is Lange, who at this point in time is deeply involved in the socialist calculation debate, and seems to, what are the relations there? So as, again, on the how Marxist was it?
Thank you. This is the first time where I present the book in its entirety, and I really appreciate your question, because this is a book that has so many layers, right? It's a history of the country, history of people, history of social science, and broader political history of Eastern Europe. So, and it's the history of Jewish politics in Eastern Europe too, and not just in Europe, globally speaking. And there is this the history of socialist thought involved too, obviously. And I do engage with all these contexts, and to answer your question, let me just show you this source. It's called Program of Prosperity, it has been signed by socialist trade unions that gathered the Jewish Labor Bund, anti-Zionist socialist party that was a Jewish party, which in the late 1930s was the biggest political party in interwar Poland, and on the rise in 37, 8, and 9. And that's why I call the book Economics of Hereness, although I'm not sure if this term will survive, because Hereness was English translation of a Jewish word Deutschheit, Hereness, which was the slogan of the Jewish socialists who opposed the creation of territorial state in Palestine or territorial solution for Jews outside Eastern Europe. And full employment the idea of full employment needs to be understood as very realization of those Polonized Jews who were actually, Landa was even a convert. God forbid, right? I mean, in some circles, you would no longer speak to a Jew who converted to Christianity if you were Jewish, right? But there was a slow process of realization on the part of those Polonized Jews who indeed had a quite privileged lives, that you need to create an alliance with the Jewish street to carry out your program. And so there was, first of all, complete ignorance of the Jewish politics on the side of the people I'm talking to, because they wanted to leave this world. But under the pressure of Hitler's rise to power and also the rise of fascism in Poland in the 1930s, these new alliances between people who believe that they are above ethnic thinking and they are above nationalism and they will only think in terms of class because it's the only thing that matters, they came to a realization that they need to address the problem of ethnic discrimination and minority politics and all the things that they believed is retrograde and should be, overcome. So this program of prosperity is a brainchild of this reckoning, and it has been written by Ludwig Landau, who translated theories of Kalecki into policy making, basically. And there is another co-author who was also a Polonized Jew, Marek Bright, who was better known in financial economics. Well, he was also in the circle of Landau and Kalecki. So I think this program was very much in conversation with the Zionist socialists and other political parties, and was not belligerent against them because, in the era of pogroms and anti-Jewish boycotts, I think this sort of this kind of polemic would be a bit, would be politically unwise, but definitely it was an anti-Zionist proposal. If we understand anti-Zionism in its interwar context, that is very particular and should not be confused with what meanings of anti-Zionism today.
Anti-Zionist, but also anti-class warfare in some ways.
Well, not really. Well, this is another question. What is the role of the state in socialist economy? And in Eastern and Central Europe, it was not at all clear because the Soviet Union was an anti-example of a state that exploited and was an anti-example for this heterodox socialists who lived in East Central Europe. they didn't. There was a certain hostility towards the state that was ideological, and so the idea of to nationalize resources, strategic resources, banking, energy, etc. Like big industry. These steps were discussed, right? How to nationalize? What is the role of the state in, intervening in national economy? What is actually socialism? And I think what is really interesting that state intervention was something that was important to create full employment economy, but those actors had problems with imagining how the state could actually intervene because the states around them were rather hostile entities, right? And Poland itself was an autocratic formation, so, to ally with the Polish state was also problematic. So the idea of full employment was bold and I think very novel, but it hit the, it had its very, it had limitations that were understood as tragic dilemmas. Shall we support the Polish state that discriminates ethnic minorities? Maybe it's better to nationalize all the resources because it's more important to defend, to develop Polish state and defend it against Nazi Germany than to just, oppose the Polish state no matter what. So these were those hard dilemmas that Polish economists grappled with, also of this, Marxist origin.
Hi, thank you for this great talk. I had a question about the connections or other competing multi-ethnic views in Poland at the time and whether Kalecki and Landau are related to that. And I'm thinking specifically from the image you had about the Polish independence of, I think Piłsudski is in that image. And Piłsudski's idea of the intermarium as a sort of a multi-ethnic Polish-led initiative. Are there any connections there? Did Landau and Kalecki have connections there? And also, is there sort of any contemporary resonance today with these ideas? So with the intermarium, you have things like the 3 Cs initiatives that are sort of building off of these ideas 100 years later in a very different political context. Is there a similar sort of transformation of these interwar ideas in contemporary Polish thinking? Thanks.
Well, your question points at the phenomenon of the interwar period, which is a nation/empire, like a nation that wants to become an empire, right? It was Italy, it was Germany, it was Japan, and Poland, right, as a political entity and its elites wanted to be exactly wanted to transform Poland into nation empire, or some British scholars of the time called it small power imperialism, right? So, Poland was surrounded by powers that wanted to expand territorially and belligerent, and so the Polish raison d'etat and intermarium was really a sort of this expansionist idea. So it was the zeitgeist of the time, obviously, but full employment economy was certainly anything but, right? It really believe that you expand country economically and not territorially, and you don't develop your country or replace austerity with growth by taking somebody else's territory and then just extracting what it is. So I'm not exactly sure if I answer your question, but this kind of expansionist agenda was I think today what would be the relevance of it today, I think you have more nuanced mechanisms of carrying out expansionist policy than shifting borders, right? But at the time, shifting borders was definitely the first thing, and it's very interesting that in this review called Socialist Review, Michał Kalecki, who is really, really understood as the sort of father of economics based on class thinking, right? Let's face it. He spent a lot of time here to discuss, already in 1932, not just if Germany with Hitler at the helm, because he anticipated that Hitler would sooner or later win in Germany, not whether Germany would go east to expand its territory, but when. And territorial conquest was believed, he believed that territorial conquest is a remedy to inflation. You just take somebody, you don't need to have like inflationary growth, you just occupy another country and then you don't have the monetary problem. I don't want to go here into details of financial economics, but for Kalecki, who really believed that development should avoid both austerity and ballooning in inflation, the world of expanding nation states was a sort of a canvas on which he understood, how economics works. Economics was always determined by politics. That went almost without saying in interwar period, and my book shows that was the case, and it's the takeaway today. You need politics to. The economic solutions eventually are just devices for politics. Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed talk, and a very complicated human story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to put it really simplistically,
Mm-hmm.
and full concept of full employment become more irrelevant today because advancement of AI, right? And there are talk about providing basic income as
Mm-hmm.
solution. So, at least scientifically, if you have an idea that's intrinsically not workable, how could you expect to have a success outcome?
Successful outcome of
Yeah.
full employment policy?
The idea of full employment, because it's against the science.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that takes us a little bit beyond the parameters of the talk.
Mhm.
Perhaps we could move
Yeah.
on.
Okay. Thank you so much for your talk. And my question probably continues this line about multi-ethnic issue. And I wanted to ask, how did they see the framework of overcoming this ethnic discrimination? So whether they saw it within a kind of modernist project that once there is economic advancement, that population kind of arrives at some modern condition in which this social / cultural homogeneity is achieved
Yes.
by this means, or they had a kind of different vision that would be not multiculturalist, because clearly they didn't want to celebrate, as you mentioned, this ethnic division of economy, but somehow embracing some version of pluralism, because simultaneously you already have the Soviet experiment and with its ethnic class dualism, and neighboring Belarus, in which there were 4 national languages, including
Yes.
Yiddish.
Yes.
Right? And so how then this overcoming of discrimination, whether they envisioned it would be overcome also institutionally and politically? Thank you so much.
Yeah. Maybe to start with this question, I think this is the weak point of this Polish idea of full employment. The Jewish Labor Bund, the Jewish socialists who opposed the creating of national Jewish state in Palestine, to put it bluntly, right? They and also my protagonists, they believe that economic life unites people. If you take a shoe, you need to. What is a shoe? Shoe is not is created. You need animals from Christian peasants who right, from which leather is produced, and then you have a Jewish artisan who makes the shoe, and then it's sold, also in the city, in places that were multi-ethnic. So eventually, economic life and creation of things, manufacturing, right, material civilization, is an exercise in multi-ethnic cooperation. And I think this way of thinking, as I try to explain in chapter 1, comes from this from this 19th century idea of this holistic thinking, integrative thinking. Capitalism brings people together because people need to cooperate, and I think this is still, and in socialism it would be the same. And so by creating material cooperation and providing jobs, there will be social peace. And I think this is perhaps the weakest point, of this theory that I think was left unaddressed, even though I believe, I know that there was a sort of tragic reckoning that there are not enough people in the Polish society who would support the idea of full employment not as a 1-0 game, which is a competition between ethnic groups, but as a sort of an exercise in cooperation. And then cultural autonomy was also in this world of statistically minded economists something that was left aside. And people derived their sense of self-esteem from or embed their sense of self in those cultural practices, like speaking their own language, right? Sending your children to a school. These things were left aside in the politics in the history of the politics that I have just explained here. So the materialist thinking was prevalent, and it definitely obscured or marginalized with also effect that is hard to estimate, the importance of culture, and I think it's a very tragic story. I mean, in the real world, and today especially, policy making is very difficult. It is just very difficult, and I think in the interwar period, it felt like that there is a need to have a public policy that is not just about forced migration or ethnic cleansing and belligerent state of belligerent politics, but something that would be an alternative. And it seems like the alternative had its very was also a very limited proposal. So again, the book is not about successful implementation of something, but it really tells the story of reckoning and tragic ironies and a certain death of ideas too, right? Because they were just, if you don't have control over your fate, then other things take control over. So. That's I think at the heart of the book, but not a hopeless book.
And with that